Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's second event of the Sheaf Poetry Festival at Off the Shelf Festival. We are planning a full festival of events for May 2023, but in the meantime, we're programming this wonderful trio of events for you today with Off the Shelf. We had a great event this morning on writing the now, and we've got another fantastic event at 7 called When I Think of My Body. If you are interested in any other events that we're running, like our May Festival, we have a mailing list somewhere which you can put your name on at the end. But this event is called Waterways because all the poets you're about to hear, their work is in some way connected to our rivers, seas and canals, although they're going to take you in all sorts of different directions with their work. You're going to hear Anna Selby, then Roy McFarlane and then Steve Ely. I will say a bit more about each of those before they come up. And then at the end of all three readings, there'll be a bit of time for audience questions as well. So first of all, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the poet and naturalist, Anna Selby. Her pamphlet Field Notes was one of the London Review of Books bookshop bestsellers for 2 years running and was an Irish Times Book of the Year. And one of the most interesting elements of Anna's work for me is that her process in which the writing of the poems themselves takes place outdoors, live and in situ with the flora and fauna that they are about. Field Notes includes thoughts and observations on marine environments and species that were written on waterproof notebooks while freediving, scuba diving and snorkeling under the Atlantic Ocean. She's doing a PhD on empathy, ecology and plein air poetry at Manchester Metropolitan University and is editor for environmental feminist publisher Hazel Press. So please welcome to the stage Anna Selby.
2 freediving poems. And the first one is really about how miraculous the human body is. And there's a thing called the mammalian dive reflex. And basically it kicks in even if you put your face into cold water, your heartbeat lowers, and it's what enables freedivers to dive right down to the bottom of the ocean and then do a workout. You can see videos of them doing it, or fish, or walk down there. So this is called What Happens to Your Heart. It goes like this. You will be floating. Your skin will become thirst. Submerge your face. A metamorphosis starts, blood retreats, heartbeat slowing, your mind an almost state. If you choose, dive. The transformation grows. You become water, mammalian. On land, the equivalent pressure kills. For the first few feet, your lungs are buoys. Afterwards, contracting air shrinks you. Go deeper. You swim into a gravityless place. Here is where the ocean stops pushing you away. Further, the master switch kicks. The pressure trebles. Your heart ticks even slower. Below, it plummets, 14 beats or lower. You should be unconscious. Your chest size halves. Organ walls work as release valves. Now, turn back up. Everything switches, reinflates, races. You are land again, of and on. Your heart broke laws. I forgot to say that a lot of the poems that I'm working on at the moment are all about the red list in the UK and abroad. So macos are one of the endangered species that we're killing at, heartbreaking rates, really. And since I started my PhD, which is all about empathy and ecology and plein air poetry, where we go out and it has the word Einfühlungen, where we get our word for empathy from. It's a German word, which means to go to feel into. And since I started the PhD, some of the UK species I've been writing about are now on the red list, and one of those is swifts. So I'm going to do a few swift and starling poems. Song for Two. Apis apis. Two birds discuss what it is to be birds, how heaviness would feel if it were possible, what light it is that blooms over them. Boomerang moons, their wings whisper to the dark. Now a nick, now a cut, now a curve. They carve through the night with white threads in their beaks. Moonset fugitives, sky calligraphers, little whittlers, air chasers who screech into the morning. Their lives are a complete act of faith that someone will call and someone will answer. A note will open a note. I just think swifts, I just think swifts are miraculous. They do everything on the wing. You'll know this anyway. They make their nests on the wing. They mate on the wing. They eat, they drink on the wing. When you see them as fledglings take off from the nest, sometimes they won't have their feet back on the earth for years. It's just, okay. So one of the things about being a naturalist and a woman is that I go into a kind of childlike reverence and awe and innocence. And sometimes when I resurface or when I'm out alone, that is shattered and confronted by a number of experiences. This is one of them. And it, just to warn you, it does have some kind of sexual harassment and violence in. But I wanted to write the truth of what it's like. Sea cucumbers. I go to the sea when I'm lousy with sleep, startled, half dreaming, beneath, 1 part waking to 3 parts deep. Tonight I walk down to the harbour, past the catcalls, the men, the neon takeaways, great thighs of kebab meat pivoting in lit windows. I push my body down into the water to hide under the cuff of the waves, lying, arms folded, watching fish turn their silver. I am their inmate, drifting over them as we roll. We blow and are a kiss blown back. Through a blur of spit in my goggles, I'm studying leopard-spotted sea cucumbers, fat, thick, huge as porno cocks in the greasy water. I see one pour itself into a rock, observing this beautiful punk unchaining its skin, liquefying. When I surface, the men spill over the harbour wall. I recall a film I saw on the telly accidentally when I was 8, where a woman gets gang raped on a pinball machine. The harbour men flick their cigarettes, staring, starting down the steps. Disco lights pucker, slip. Everything is inconsistent. This last one is about an endemic plant species called Tady violets. And where I wrote a lot of the poems for field notes was on the Canary Islands, where you get species that you don't find anywhere else in the world. And once they're gone, that's it. And these flowers are probably like in the space of this room around Tady volcano. And this one was written at about 12,000 feet in the dark. Flowers in the volcano. What isn't saved is gone. The man said, who'd walked through the night with me to the lip of this volcano. A track of wounds left in the scree. Our footprints shining. At my feet, the impossibility of 3 purple violets shaking in the dark. Thank you so much, everyone.
Wow, Anna, thank you so much. You really have a way of inviting us into an experience almost as a non-human. That's such a clever and immersive way of writing, so thank you so much. How are we all doing? We okay? Good. So next up, we have Roy McFarlane. Roy is a poet, playwright, and former youth and community worker born in Birmingham of Jamaican parentage. Roy is the Poet Laureate for Canals in Britain, and he's also Birmingham and Midlands Institute Poet in Residence. From Amsterdam to Philadelphia, Roy has shared his passion for social justice, equality, identity, love, and the healing power of poetry as a witness to our times. His debut collection, Beginning with Your Last Breath, was followed by The Healing Time, both from 9 Arches, which was shortlisted for the Ted Hughes Award and longlisted for the Jalak Prize. His latest collection, Living by Troubled Waters, is very hot off the press. I think it's just been published earlier this month, also from 9 Arches, and it's a visceral and vital book exploring slavery, colonialism, and the continued tragedies visited upon black bodies whilst these legacies remain unresolved. And it's a really moving intersection between the historical and the contemporary, the personal and the political. So please welcome to the stage Roy McFarlane.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Hi, Sheffield. How you doing? Kind of doing okay, yeah? That was a beautiful reading, Anna. Some incredible experiences there. I think I might go sea dive, or walk off the beach in Brighton, see how far I can go. Yeah? Waters, Living by Troubled Waters. Before I go into that, I just wanted to share a poem as part of my year as Canal Laureate. It's incredible being a poet, the things you get to write about, you would never imagine that you would write. Canals, I would never imagine that. But when I was given the invite to, if I would like to do it, I just thought, the area where I come from, Tipton, just outside of Wolverhampton, what they call the Black Country. During lockdown, the canals was my kind of place that I got away and chilled and was able to make sense of this world, as it were. And I'll come back to that in Living by Troubled Waters. But I spent 3 days in Ellesmere Yard, somewhere on the border of Wales and England, Shropshire, around there. I was told don't get it mixed with Ellesmere Port. Don't mix the two things. They're two different places, right? And I was working at this old boatyard that's been there for 250 years. Literally one of the original boatyards looking after the canals. And we kind of nicknamed it the AA of the canals. And this one's called the Lords of the Earth, and it's dedicated to the men that do this work. And a little quote here. Poseidon, god of water, his name means husband of the earth or Lord of the earth. These men who know waters, when embankments disappear, where water doesn't stand still, they manage and manipulate the flow of water. These lords of the earth will walk across lands to cut and remove fallen trees or carry sheep across waters. Usher the dead from boats gone adrift, guide the parasuicide tied to aqueducts. These lords know the danger of water, have been pulled under and crushed by heavy waters. Remember, water is never level. Know your highs and lows. Feed the canals, feed the reservoir. And when storm come, let water through. These husbands of the earth, emergency responders and controllers of waters, will hold bridges up and if need be, pull them down. And people will sleep safely on water and know the nudge of quiet waters. Thank you. So the collection, beautifully, I love that summary. I need to get a recording that. That will help me. The collection starts off with a conversation with the heron. I won't go into that poem, but I will end with the heron that I was talking to along a canal. When George Floyd passed away, when George Floyd was murdered, it just got me into a space that I couldn't write. And then, walking along the canal, I saw a heron, never seen before, majestical and beautiful. And it started this collection. I started to think about my mother. All my collections are kind of always have a reference to my mother, my life mother, who looked after me when I was adopted. And I wanted to talk about my life mother, and especially her journeys by troubled waters. And so there's a selection of poems in here called Living by Troubled Waters, and this is the second one. And there's a beautiful song, a jazz singer called Emma Jean Thackeray. She's got a song called Spectra, and there's a spectre in my house. He walks right through me. Our house was often visited by spirits. Waters often found their way into our home. My mother, of sound mind, saw things other people didn't see. Her whole body a divining rod. She who moved gracefully in the spirit when it poured, danced in the pool, raised her arms spellbound to the sky as if she could touch and hold onto the source. We lived in a semi-detached house on a hill. Water trickled in, leaving trails and watermarks. Only my mother noticed and tried to ignore, smiling when she saw I was watching, and she whispered to the walls as they drooled. My mother, who mellowed by still waters, could not be at peace. And in this nursery, I learned of duppies and rolling calves, of climbing a flight of stairs on hands and knees, of a boxed room big enough to leave a memory in a corner, darkness embodied, moving into the light, stretching forth an arm, and a child flying down a flight of stairs, sitting on a magic carpet, shouting, "Butter, butter, butter," upstairs. We left the house on the top of the hill, always moving until Mother found serenity in a home by still waters. For those who don't know what duppies and rolling calves are, it's a Caribbean for ghosts and spirits. And I just wanted to kind of revisit how we survive as a black community by troubled waters over the last 400 years, and how things have survived, legacies that have passed down through the family. But if we can have hate, and we can do this to our fellow brethren because of color, because of difference, because of all these things, and we don't talk about it, we don't deal with it, will we ever change? Will we ever tackle and make a difference and let our children understand that we need to be different? And when you look now that we have people of color in positions of power, and don't get me wrong, just because you're people of color, it doesn't need to. It's the humanity of individuals that will voice the hate of people trying to find a better life. Oftentimes, people just escaping from death, from wars, from tyranny, and we still putting up the walls, still putting up borders. And then it makes me sick that when a crisis becomes an headline news, we all suddenly go, "Oh my God, I can't believe this has happened." And then 3 months later, we put up more barriers. This one's called Pantoum of the 27. Just a slight little joke in all of this. When I was made canal lawyer, and they found out I had moved to Brighton, somebody says, "There's no canals in Brighton, is there?" And then somebody says, "No, you got the English Channel. Biggest canal you'll ever have." Here we go. Pantoum of the 27. 27 people died in the channel. Unmarked waters, waiting for authorities to make up their minds as they clung and held on in cold, dark waters. One by one, they let go of each other and the boat, waiting for authorities to make up their minds. Ill-fated wind blew them back into French waters, and the boat barely floated as they let go of each other, and many died before the ferry boat picked them out of cold waters. Ill fate or winds blew them back into French waters as they cried, "Please, God, rescue us. Please, God, rescue us." Many died as the ferry boat picked them out of cold waters with hopes to make it to the other side, whatever the sacrifice. Please, God, rescue us. Please, God, rescue us. Could be heard, but Sharon was waiting and the gods were aloof to their pleas, although they paid the coins to gangsters and traffickers. 17 men, 7 women, and 3 children perished. Sharon was waiting and the gods were aloof to their pleas, and the channel that divides us from those seeking refuge swallowed 17 men, 7 women, and 3 children, fleeing with their breath and their clothes on their back. The channel that divides us from those seeking refuge, clinging, holding onto hope in cold, dark waters, fleeing with their breath and their clothes on their back, These 27 people died in the channel of unmarked waters. Actually, I probably got time for this one. I didn't. Okay. Now, the collection comes together. There's a nice little section in there where my mother tells me stories. It's like the oral tradition, like a griot. And I didn't realize that these stories that she was telling me, they were actually truth. When I started the research, I actually found. One of the stories she told was of a hurricane that went through the Caribbean islands, 1952, something like that, called Hurricane Charlie. So this is connection with the hurricanes. It's not in the collection. Well, a bit of it is in the collection, but if you buy the collection, you'll understand, right? How this fits in, right? So it'll make sense if you buy the collection, right? Just thought I'd say that. Okay, here we go. Call me by my name. 1. Hurricanes have always followed my family from the day we arrived on these islands. Enslaved, our true names taken away in the Caribbean seas. 2. Anything characterized by a turmoil or force suggestive of a hurricane. These are the lands that adopted us. Uprooted, we were planted in hostility. Lands we weren't given, but bloody in fruits, always in floods and hurricanes. 3. Taino, the original people of the land, lived in Yasikis led by Cacique. Hear them in barbecue, canoe, cassava, guava, manatee, people of Jamaica, the land of wood and water. They knew how to name their gods. A child so mischievous, its strength tore islands apart. Huracan, Huracan, Huracan. 4. The British anglicized the name of Huracan. Every time he, she, they returned, reborn, renamed Charlie, Gilbert, Ivan, Dean, and all the others. 5. Our first known meeting with Huracan, the one they called Hurricane Charlie, under a sacred blue sky, which turned into the blood of the Lamb. My mother finds shelter in the biggest house on the hill and calls Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. And she's baptized in the fury of Huracan, who demands to be called by his name, and she unfurls like a parchment, becomes a living scroll to tell the stories of an island and its people. 7. Grace Nichols talked of a hurricane that came visiting a British isle, came looking for a windrush children. Talk to me, Huracan. Talk to me, Oya. Talk to me, Shango. Thank you. Okay, 2 more poems, right? And honestly, you got to buy the book, because I can't really kind of explain how some things I've been doing with the text and things like that. But I mean, okay, I'll stop telling you. But let me go into this poem, right? So remember I was telling you about legacies, right? This is, I believe, is a powerful legacy from the Middle Passage through slavery, Jamaica to the present day. I grew up in a really Pentecostal church, charismatic, spirit-flowing, spirit-moving in the aisles. And, oh God, there was this tradition that we had to do, the Lord's Supper, where we shared bread and wine, and secondly, washing of the saints' feet. The men would go to one side, the women to another side. So here we go, the act of remembering. And actually, this is going to be the last poem, right? We took off our brogues, leathers, and crocodile skins, folded our silk socks, whilst others with their clerks and cotton socks waited for eyes to be distracted by sisters in white singing, "Meet me by the river someday, hey. Meet me by the river, not far away, hey." Old men who knew rivers waited for the pouring of water in enameled basins, waited for the pouring of the Spirit, hands clapping, backs arched, the jerk, the side drop, the top torso wavering in an imaginary wind blowing through the aisles. We jostled to wash our best friend's feet, avoided the hard-skinned, corn-heavy, decade-stained feet of old men. But the old souls knew the game, broke the line, changed seating, wrapped white towels around us, singing, "And when my Lord shall call me home, happy, happy home beyond the sky, meet me by the river someday." Our white shirt sleeves rolled up, silk ties tucked away, we kneeled before elders, scooped handfuls of water, washed weary feet, leaving a bowl filled with a cloud of witness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roy. That was incredible. You have an incredible way of getting such intricacy and such detail and such richness into something that then becomes so direct and powerful. That was really incredible. Thank you. So next and final reader is going to be Steve Ely, whose books of poetry include Oswald's Book of Hours, England, Incendium Amoris, and Zizi Tatata, The Song of the Willow Tit, and Lectio Violent. His books have won or been nominated for several literary prizes, including the Forward Prize for Best First Collection, the Ted Hughes Award, the Michael Marks Award, and the Northern Writers Award for Poetry. His most recent book of poems, The European Eel, has been published by Sheffield Press, Longbarrow, and it was shortlisted for the Laurel Prize. It's a single long poem that imagines the life cycle, ecological contexts, and enigma of the charismatic and critically endangered European eel. And it's a really unique book combining scientific research, poetic meditations, and also some beautiful illustrations. So another book for you all to buy. Please welcome to the stage, Steve Ely.
Thank you very much for that introduction, because it was my introduction, so now I don't have to say it. I wrote a book about the European eel, about its life cycle, epic migration, and the huge range of anthropogenic threats that it faces, which have reduced its population, its recruitment into some rivers by 99%, which is ridiculous when I consider that when I started fishing in the 1970s, the main job was to avoid catching eels. They were so common. You know, if you're a rubbish fisherman like me, that's all you caught. My mates caught proper fish. What I did, I imagined the life of the eel through a specific one that I trapped in a beck for research purposes, and I kept in an aquarium. And when it was in my aquarium, it started to change from a yellow eel into a silver eel. So then I knew I needed to release it because it was ready to migrate in the autumn. So it's a long poem. So I'm going to read 4 sections: 2 from the journey from Sargasso to the pool where I caught it, and 2 from the pool where I caught it back to Sargasso. In the subtropical convergence zone of the southern Sargasso, over the edge of the Neres Abyssal, southeast of the Bermuda Ridge, snow is rising in the water column from 1,500 feet. Somewhere in Tethys' salted darkness, in spurts of milt and billowing roe, eels are birthing their posterity, a spore storm of eggs in uncountable centillions, each buoyed on its micron of oil. The embryos float in the Miocene water like dust motes caught in a shaft of light, and ascending through the photocline, join the thermonuclear microplankton of the drifting epipelagic. In the 18-degree water, hatching, it is hypothesized, takes place after 2 days of embryonic growth, after which emerges the pinhead imago, veined, elongate, a leaf of transparent white willow, leptocephalus, the larval form of anguilla, absorbing its yolk sac for 10 or 12 days, lengthening daily by micrometers, gaining weight daily in micrograms, until a fortnight after hatching, the size of a sand grain or emphatic full stop. It unhinges its tiny gaping jaws, fangs half as long as its head, and hunts in the eutrophic blizzard, seizing diatoms, dinoflagellates, polyethylene microbeads, fueling up for the 30-month long haul, Sargasso to the Biscay Abyssal. Sargasso, a bright lens of brine sitting light on the freeze of the Antarctic bottoms, herded to a hump by the North Atlantic Gaia. The desert sea, life confined to its turbulent edges, the highways of the eel, and the surface rafts of drifting sargassum from which it takes its name. The graveyard sea, swallower of troop ships and Grumman Avengers, where the drowned float forever in zombied suspension, and the albatross rots on the mirror. Columbus struck his prow right through it, en route to the New World's plunder, but he liked the Sargasso, blue as the sky in Andalusia, fragrant as the air in Seville, the garbage sea, where the plastic of 3 continents forms mats the breadth of Spain. South of the plastic, offshore from Puerto Rico, leptocephali ride on the Antilles current. Feeding at night in the epipelagic, they in daylight descend to the dark of deep scattering, a phototaxic flight from the light and the deaths that lurk there. Harpooning cnidarians, the grip claws of krill, the lit jaws of the lanternfish, devoured in centillions, centillions riding still. A month or so since hatching, the size of an April tadpole, they move in the plankton like Pac-Man, simple machines of growth and devouring, deliverers of the savage tellus written in their genes. They drift with the current, making 5 or 15 miles each day, beyond Grand Bahama to the Blake Escarpment, where the Florida current blows out from the strait on the plume of deep water horizon. There, between Andros Island and Biscayne Bay, it courses into the racing Antilles to form the Gulf Stream, a roaring salt river hurtling north on the edge of the American continental shelf, its estuaries a blight. Estrogen-saturated sewage, methamphetamine neurotoxins, chromosome warping neonicotinoid runoff. The leptocephali soak it up and tumble to Hatteras with the flotsam of the current. Single-use Canaveral space junk, the strip mall's car-tossed fast food trash, and radioactive manatees. Now, we skip forward now 3 years, and we find the leptocephali has turned into a little yellow eel, and it's made its way across the Atlantic, up the English Channel, the North Sea, enters the Humber, and is in a small South Yorkshire stream called the Ear Beck. Now 15 miles upstream from Don, only a handful of eels remain of the hundreds that passed the Thorpe in Bourne control gate. Nowhere to go now. In 3 or 4 miles, the map's fine blue line will fritter in a maze of spring-fed trickles in the fields between Hemsworth and Kirby. But a quarter mile beyond the sewerage, in the flood-flattened rape below Lovett's garage, new water joins the flow. Frickley Beck, the barely a mile-long terminal flow of a tangle of tiny dikes and streams that rise from the clays between Watchcliffe and Ringston Hill. A dozen or so divert and enter its current. They wriggle along the flat-scraped silt in the sheer-side drain of the embanked channel and pass under the road to the ragwort horsefield in the shadow of Frickley Tips. Stridable stream, meandering under the bankside hawthorns in a foot or two of depth. Once a home for water voles and nesting bankside moorhens, but that was before the mink. But even in this desultory trickle, its workaday load of pesticides and occasional blights of sewage, the water world's intact. You can still tickle trout, and riverfish flee before your bootsteps. Dace and gudgeon, bullhead and barbel, the odd patrolling pike. And eels, of course, buried under banks in the clefts of root balls, wherever the beck finds a yard or so of depth. Where the beck is straightened along Frickley Lane, she crawls along the ballasted shallows under a wall of gabion limestone. Here the waters flow fast and broken as the tumbling spate of Holywell Beck roars into the flow from a concrete pipe and roils in its rumbling plunge pool. The stones of the bridge the pipe replaced, along with the swallow's nest crusted to the ashlar, were abandoned in the flow to cause this foaming turbulence. The eel flashes under the feral white water and slides into the flat-bottomed, deep-cut race that glints below the lattice of slashed-back quick a fathom below the lane. Hard banks here, no shelter, but shortly the stream begins to widen and find a little depth. Another pipe, another plunge pool, at the gateless gap facing Hooton Thorn Covert on the point of the nameless Foxhead Wood. Waist deep and wide enough for a man to float on his back like Jesus. The covert side grassy, unhedged. The lane side a hedge of splintered hawthorn and the overhang gloom of a sycamore. She reaches the pipe lip, only inches above her surface-breaking head, submerges and circles the pool. Beneath the pipe drops trickle of fall, a dark eel rises, lunging from the rubble towards her. She flicks off in a plume of silt and continues her circling in the sycamore's shadow, snaking the caves of the submarine root ball. Rat smells, trout smells, effluent from the landrace piggery, stinks of dead pigeon, pheasant, and crow. Bloodworm, caddis, and fry. Eel smell, but no incumbent eel. So under the bank of Frickley Beck, by the gateless gap at Hooton Thorn Covert, on the point of the nameless Foxhead Wood, she reaches the end of her 40-month journey. She knots her tail in a crevice of the root ball and pokes out her gape in a predatory billow of breathing. Now she waits and rests. Wavy dissolve. 15 years later. It's a dark moon in September. Late September dark moon. Thunderheads massing and snarling. She stirs in her cave in the sycamore root ball. Her black and silver skin is tight, her rippling snake flesh slick with gleaming fat. She lifts her head and breathes the water, kneading her long pectorals. Eyes like oversized pilot goggles clap to the sides of her head, rods supplanting cones in the second transformation. She perceives only light and darkness now, the spatial acuity of predatory vision a redundant inefficiency. 6,000 black and fasting miles to the spawning grounds of the southern Sargasso, over the edge of the Neres Abyssal, southeast of the Bermuda Ridge. She stretches her length from the submarine tangle and tastes the turbulent, swollen waters, recoils from dusk light dimming overhead, winds restless through the maze of roots and snags. Stacked cumulonimbus, blacked out constellations, hammering rain stripping the leaves from the sycamores, field drains foaming with tilth in suspension, beck risen to the arch of the culvert pipe, leaf litter corkscrewing under the tunnel in a roaring Coriolis whirlpool. She stretches again from her submarine root ball to sniff in the whelming flow, Nitrum, Roundup, Viroxide Super, Superlic's equine mineral lick, the olfactory blur of migrating silver eels. She unknots her tail and abandons her length to the current, flung rope in the torrent, hurtling with the debris in suspension, black blizzards of leaves and broken off branches, cannoning bottles and tins, flushed through culverts and under bridges, bent forests of bulrush and torn off mats of flag. She's thundered across the inundated common to the maelstrom confluence with Emsel Beck, where a stubble-filled lake is expanding upstream in the whiff of the sewerage outflow. Eel stink tumbling blindly beside her, grey froth of used condoms and sanitary towels. Ghostly vortex of mewling blackhead gulls. Shot out from the culvert like a cork, she rides the torrent to Carcroft Common, where the ear has broadened to 30 feet and is overtopping its light industrial flood banks. Sodium streetlights glowering, siling darkness, but the pummeling current of black-white water is too strong to be resisted. She swept on the surge to the confluence of dawn, sheer volume of flood backing up at the pipe, a surface-breaking, wrestling shoal of stymied silver eels. But the gates slammed open by the force of the flux and the suck of the distant German sea. She javelins through and enters the river, having ridden the spate for 16 miles in less than half a night. No weirs on her rivers, no Archimedes screw, men with fyke or wing nets. Darkness and spate keep the herons from hunting. Pike beat their gills in the shelter of tributary streams. The only hazards are collision and stranding. So now we leap forward 6 months, but some recent research indicates it might be a year. It might take them a year to actually migrate back to Sargasso. This is the end of the journey, and you need a trigger warning. This section contains eel porn. She's traveling west by north with the current, a curve offshore from windward. Swollen like a pomegranate, her roseate column thick with eggs, each microscopic seed of blood lit in its aril of vitaline gold. She winds in the flow like a length of fraying halyard, the edge of coming apart. He's swimming 100 yards behind her, locked onto her estrogen contrail. They drift for days down the whelming current, moving deeper into the fabled sea. 19 degrees north, 61 west, approaching the rise of the Puerto Rico Trench, 100 miles north of Barbuda. Blue blackness above, black blackness below. Waning crescent, 24% visible, faint glow of deep scatterings, bioluminescence. Diesel growl of longliners, trolling snoods for snapper. Humpback and pilot whales, wahoo and marlin picking off the bounty. A continent of eels coming into fruition as far as fancy's lightness eye can see. Little males, 14-inch veterans of the hemispheric journey, hanging limp in the drift like branches of flaccid sargassum, completing their nuptial transformation. Others, already come into their ripeness, are riding the pheromone bow waves of females, girthy as pythons, 4 or 5 feet long. Soft explosions of pluming milt flare from mesopelagic darkness as all around them eels entwine and jettison their loads. The water stinks of sex and death, progesterone, testosterone, ichthyotoxic blood. She shivers in the warm aphrodisiac current, every nerve and tingling, each tender tip engorged. He's drifting in her orbit now, homed in on her cloacal trail. He loops his snaky electron around her. She recoils and snaps her gaping rat-trap jaw. Not ready. So for the moment, they simply swim together. The 19-inch female, her underslung bicep of belly, and her swollen bootlace suitor. They drift with the current deep into black Sargasso. 20 degrees north, 62 west. The outer rise of the Puerto Rico Trench, 100 miles north of Anguilla. New moon, 1% visible. Kraken darkness, lit only by octopus phosphorescence and the bright detonations of ejaculating eels. They've been traveling in tandem for 5 days now, through frittering flames of fertilized ova and the disarticulate space junk fall of dead and dying eels. This is their predestined, inescapable fate, the fate of every Atlantic eel since the Yucatan asteroid dropped its apocalypse 50 million years ago, to ruin themselves in the act of breeding and die in the dopamine afterglow, drifting down from the towering heights of ocean to the black-red clays of the 5-mile abyss, layer upon Google Plexian layer. Their bodies are coming apart, held together only by shrink-wrapped skin and the kamikaze cerebellum that tells them live, to breed and die. They're running on neurosteroids now, their muscular strength exhausted. It's now or never. But her biochemical transformation is finally complete. The dark moon shudders in her teleost womb, and she's suddenly wreathed in sex. He stiffens and begins his dance around her, nosing the waters, advancing and retreating in a tentative submarine hokey-cokey, like he's scared to get close, like he's got at least one glaucous eye on that gaping rat-trap jaw. She drifts and ignores him, gaping and closing that rat-trap jaw, beckoning him forward until he finally plucks up the courage to touch, coming under and rubbing her pulsing belly with the nacelles of his head. He kneads the flesh of her underbody with a zigzag massage from pleated throat to vent. She gapes and twitches, swims, and for a while they swim touch tight together, him coiling his cable around the rope of her body, constricting and releasing, bringing her to the edge. She gapes and twitches, apparently impassive, but a landslide has started inside her. He uncurls his coils and once more swims beneath her, nuzzling at her leaking vent like a typhoon fueling from a stratotanker, butting the bulge of her loosening rowsack, triggering the sensory overload that will release them both into the ecstasy of body, the DMT and oxytocin rush of coitus and extinction. Milt pumps down the tube of his urethra and backs up at the sphincter of the vent. He stiffens and ejaculates a depth-charged blast of sperm. She shivers and her gold load slides. They couple in the milk cloud, lit in the shock of its bloom. Once more he's frotting the flange of her vent and butting the walls of her colon. Once more he ejaculates, again and again, until the hypertonic waters are smoking with milt and her shuddering body can hold it back no longer. She cracks like a whip and her body convulses, spurting gusher after gusher of glittering golden ova, sparks from the cornucopian flame of Archaea's unkillable dark pleroma, quickening through the mist of sperm and rising through the photocline to join the thermonuclear microplankton of the drifting epipelagic. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I love how poetry can take you to places you never thought you would go. And I think you should do an audiobook, because I was thinking I would love to listen to this while I'm on a long journey somewhere. And I felt like I was journeying when I was listening to that, and I would have loved to have, I don't know, I wanted to be journeying, but thank you. So can I ask all the poets to come up to the stage, and we'll just have some questions. Yes. So I'm going to kick us off with one to start with, and then I'll ask you to put your hands up if you've got any questions. And just to say to poets, if you give me a chance to repeat the question from the audience so that it can be heard on the film and heard by everyone. But I wanted to ask you all, to start with, all of your work has a lot of research behind it, whether that's historical or ecological. And I'm just interested in how that process works for you with doing the research, and doing the writing, whether it's like one then the other, or whether you do them concurrently. I don't know if, Anna, do you want to start because you're holding the mic?
So for me, they do go hand in hand, and sometimes I'll do the research ahead of time. And one of the things I'm exploring, and have been for a while, is my aim is to write scientifically accurate poems and get the terms in there without losing the magic and the art, but ones that would be read by a scientist that would go, yeah, thumbs up, and read artistically as good as well. And there have been a few research projects in America, in New England, and I think Louisiana, where they use old poems, old nature poems, to look at species loss. So they compare what species were there. One was with Thoreau, looking at his writing, but with other poets as well. So it's kind of like the long lens of them being used in science as well. Yeah.
Yeah, usually I do it, the writing and the kind of research, if you can dignify it with that term, the reading, the kind of learning to know about that which you're writing. But with the European eel, it was different. I kind of resolved to write about it in a kind of fit of inspiration stroke madness. And then I realized that if I was going to write about, a creature that's declined by 99% due to anthropogenic activity, I can't just be a parasite on the back of this decline. I can't be just choosing a charismatic endangered species just so I can write a poem. I've got a duty to know what I'm talking about. And I also wanted to do the thing that you described, Anna, which was to write something that could be kind of scientific, biologically credible. So I set about doing that. I hooked up with a few kind of eminent people in the field and kind of worked with them, corresponded with them, read everything that I could. And I think there was about a year of that before I put pen to paper. I also did some really half-assed, research of my own. I wouldn't dignify it with research. Basically, I caught some eels and kind of put them in an aquarium and kind of sat in front of it like this, kind of for ages. Don't try it at home because they don't do anything. They do this. They got that one. That's all they do. You drop food and you get some action, but they eat, you drop food and you get some action, but they eat like 3 or 4 big earthworms, and that sorts them out for kind of, 2 or 3 days. So they just amazing creatures.
So what about the research for that sex part?
I've got a video.
I'm following the same shoes as these poets. But for me, it's usually something that excites me. My last book was Deaths in Custody, and I think excitement is the wrong word. But I will keep on reading and reading until either I get emotionally tied to it, or there's something profound in there that I can attach to and draw a poem out. And there are many that, and this collection, I was looking at newspaper articles from the 1800s to the 1850s. I got a fellowship with the Eccles Centre, British Library. And so all I did was just kept looking until something grabbed my attention. But also there are surplus poems that I've tried, but it's not quite come to the fruition. But yeah, it's what grabs you and what you can run with, and that's how I do it.
Thank you. Does anyone have a question from the audience? Yes, at the back.
Can I ask, so it's interesting to me, there's a real difference in your poems. Some of them seem to be about the thing as it is. So the eel as an eel, in immense detail. And some of the others seem to be more my view of the thing. So how do you decide which one you want to do? This is how I feel about swifts, or this is an eel?
And just to repeat that question, it was about the difference between writing a poem about the thing, so a poem about a swift, as opposed to you as the poet, your view of that thing. Have I got that right? Yes.
Well, I guess I wouldn't say that I'm a scientist or from that perspective. So I'm certainly somebody that's either interacting or coming from, what I see, the perspective. I certainly want the facts of the thing. So like the conversation with the herons that I've gotten there, it's not as if I researched how tall they are and what they did, kind of thing. I come from that approach where I respond to them and imagine a story around them, kind of thing. That's my perspective.
I deliberately, with this book, I deliberately wanted to take any kind of protagonism out. I didn't want to have a first-person speaker. I didn't want to put myself into it. I didn't want to put there is actually a transitional bit in the middle, which is necessary because I have to identify the protagonist of the poem as the eel that I kept in my aquarium. But that's but that's not really part of the poem. It's a kind of prose link. I suppose it is part of the poem, really. And that's because I think I got frustrated with quite a lot of kind of so-called new nature writing, which seems to be, which is marketed as writing about nature. But what it quite often is a kind of personal story and nailed to a charismatic landscape or animal. And you can't often see any real expertise, any knowledge about nature in there. So I didn't want to do that. But what it did do, that decision, and wanting to kind of narrate the life story of the eel, as it was, it had a really curious effect in terms of form, because usually my poems are kind of, I don't know, I always write in sequences and book length poems, but they tend to be kind of modernist, using juxtaposition and polyphony and kind of non-sequential stuff. What I wrote with the European eel was a kind of form that's 2,500 years old. It was an epic monology. I had a hero on a quest. But going back to what Roy said as well, what it became an act of imaginative transformation. So this thing that wanted to be rooted in science and observation, what happened was the more you know about it, the more you learn about it, the more you realize how the life of this creature is absolutely dark. What we do know is just the tip of the iceberg. So what fills the gap? Imagination fills the gap, and it ultimately becomes a kind of Gnostic work of speculation.
I'm trying to get more and more out of the way with my poems, and I'm not quite there yet. They still are. There's a lot of humans in them, and there's a lot of me as a human in them. And I'm lucky because I can be subjective, and a lot of climate scientists and conservationists have to be objective, and they have to have that distance, and the joy or the love or the grief or the sorrow can't come in. And when I am under the water, what I feel is just this immense sense of love and protectiveness. And I'm thinking of Aldo Leopold's "We grieve only for what we know." So I do use human imagery and comparison, and what I try to do is reach for what will make it most vivid. And I am writing for our species, so what the references and metaphors, what can I pull on that will make this most vivid for people, or create a sense of connection there?
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's an argument for both, isn't there? The human can, like you say, create that empathy response in other humans as well. Did somebody else have their hand up? Yes.
Kind of connected a bit to what you've just been talking about. There's something that comes across in all of your work that is kind of bearing witness to observing the damage that is done by humans to the environment, to other humans, and to the modern human world. And I just wanted to ask you, kind of, how does that intersect with the kind of the work and the care of making art and making poetry?
So the question was about all of your writing focusing on the damage that's done by humans to animals and to other humans, and how that relates to the work of making poetry. Did I get that right? Yes.
It's something that I'm very conscious of and very guilty about as well, because me existing, I'm damaging so many species every day, even when I intend not to. And so when, one, I don't go back to the environments that I used to write about because I had to fly to get there. So it kind of, for me to write environmental poems and damage the environment in that process wasn't okay. And the writing I do in woodlands and things like that at the moment, I try and limit my impact as much as possible on the other species that are there. But I also know that the very fact of me being there and paying witness is having an effect on that habitat and that environment. So it doesn't really answer your question, but it's something that's I feel an uneasiness around.
I understand that as well. But I think any writer, any creative writer's got kind of two main responsibilities really if they're going to write something that's half decent. One is to know what they're talking about, that is to say to do the research, however you define research, and the other one is to imagine precisely. And I think it's it's the imagination that can transform the research into art, because what that does, it invokes your own subjectivity, you know, and subjectivity implies vision. So you have the scientific work, the 200 and odd papers and 30 odd monographs that I read, and the eel monitoring I did on the river roading and all that type of stuff. But that wouldn't be enough. What would that be? That would be you know, kind of a digest of other people's research, or it would be a kind of diary of stuff what I have done. But I think what I kind of arrived at was a subjective vision of the eel that came in the writing. So it wasn't at the beginning, and I thought I will execute this vision that I've got. I started to write, and it developed, and it rolled. So I don't know if you got the, you know, that last part of it. You know, there's some lines in there that could come straight out of the kind of Gnostic Gospels in there, and some of the language in there, because it's all, because what you become increasingly aware of, whatever you know nothing, and you have to fill the gap with vision and imagination in there. Yeah.
That is so true. And I guess that's what we're doing. We're filling in the gaps. But equally, the witness has been a key element of my writing, a witness to the voices that have not been spoken, or the voices lost. And the theme of the water is there, whether it's about migration, refugee and asylum seekers, whether it's the crossing, the Middle Passage, where so many Africans died in the Atlantic, and their souls are there. I had to write that story in whatever way that I could find it, and so the constant stream that ran through there was troubled waters. And so if I could do that research around waters, from having a conversation with a heron on the canal, or looking back at a painting of Hugh Locke when he looks at a boat traveling across the Atlantic and what happened to the souls that died, that's the makeup of my collection. And I'm just trying to be a witness so that others can see 100 years from now or whatsoever.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning as well that in that book you've got a lot of original printed sources that you've, like you showed, you've either kind of done erasure on, or you can actually see that material that you've used directly in the book, which I thought was really, really interesting. Any more questions? Yes. That's definitely not a silly question, a really interesting and important question about the writing process and how you know when a poem is finished and how many times you go back over and edit it. Don't know who wants to.
Always ongoing, always ongoing. I work a lot with choreographers and dancers, and the script will be finished, the rehearsals will be done, they'll perform it, rapturous applause, every night they get notes. And I'm like, what? So they're always, I would say things can be improved. And in terms of how I make poems, sometimes many years. So the sea cucumbers, I went back for 3 years and looked at them and the poem grew. Sometimes I'll set myself a challenge of 1 walk to compose a poem and the poem is the length of the walk. I did one bouldering up a mountain with a voice-activated dictaphone that was an epic failure. It was just me swearing and slipping. Yeah, the honest answer is that everyone's different, and when it feels like you've honoured the poem and it's the best it can be, then I feel like I'm ready to ask people of their time to look at the work.
I think it was it Auden who said the poem is never finished, it's just abandoned. And yeah, I think I agree with that. My reading copy of my own book has got lots of annotations in, and they're not, and a lot of them are to, if there's a second edition, I'll change it. I found a few things when I was doing the reading. Wow. But in terms of this book, the process it took 3 years. So there was about a year of reading and research, about, I'd say 6 months to kind of write it from beginning to end, and then I just nibbled away at it endlessly for until Brian at Long Barrel Press said, "Give me it," basically, and even in the editing process we were kind of nibbling away at it. So I don't think it ever ends really. No.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think you're forever editing. Even when you're performing, you kind of think, "Oh, there's the poem that with the Yards men. The last line, I've changed it 3 times through the readings. I've read it twice before, and every time I've changed the last line, and I'm still not happy with it. So it's, our poems become living children, and you know what children are like. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's probably the end of the event for this afternoon. But yeah, massive thank you to all of you for reading. Thank you all for coming. We do have one more event this evening at 7:00, which is called When I Think of My Body, and we've got Kim Moore, Rachel Long and Wendy Pratt, so please do come back for that. I don't think I'm supposed to say anything else. Buy books, they're over there, and I'm sure poets are happy to sign them. So thanks very much.